what's an example of a game that you'll play on the mats, and why do you feel it's such an effective way to practice?
So, there are quite a few that I like to play. I think the first game that I was taught and that really stuck with me was this game in Mandarin. It translates to like Crazy Turtle. So it's just fun names, right? But
How do you say that in
um,
Mandarin? I have to hear it in Mandarin. How do you say it?
疯狂乌龟.
Ungkong.
So
Okay.
yeah, so it's just like basically you start in a side pin position. However, you're not allowed for a chest to chest. However, the person on bottom is looking to turtle. So what this creates is a situation where the person on top has to keep someone pinned that not only wants to regard but wants to like specifically turtle, but they're not allowed to use their chest. And I would find that this creates a situation where you're used to think about like frames, levers, and wedges more critically, as opposed to just putting your weight and just like, because a crossface underhook with chest to chest is actually quite hard to escape if you put someone good. It's quite tough. So putting that handicap on the top player actually encourages like a lot of thought from both sides. Usually initially the person on bottom gets out pretty quickly, but once the person on top gets more experience and starts thinking about this position a little bit more, they actually can take a lot of steps to make it very difficult, because instead of thinking about it, okay, I'm just going to try hold you really tight, they think about, okay, what is actually enabling you to turtle? So for example, like, okay, maybe I can try wedge the far shoulder. So by putting my fist underneath the far shoulder, or maybe I can put my shin over the near bicep and make him unable to turn in one direction, but now he can turn the other way. So what can I do to act accordingly? And then you can think about the hips, the legs, the head, and so on and so on. And I feel like having that handicap of just, okay, you can't put chest pressure, now really gives you the option of, okay, now what can I do with all these other things?
That's
So that's
outstanding.
just like
Wow.
one example that I thought was like very useful. And there's like, you can basically, as long as you have a idea or a desired like what you want someone to do, you can design around like all of these things. Like something like I've been doing recently, just for the context of like ADCC, right, is having someone start in guard and a person on top, and just tell the person in guard to stand up, and the person on top is forced to hold someone down. And you get to think of different mechanisms in which you are able to hold someone down, and then you can outline these, and then people can think about them more. And I find that it enables it almost forces people to think a little bit more about problems in which you might not have thought of in an open round where everything is allowed and so on.
That's great, man. That's really awesome. I really like that. Let me ask you this: for people out there that want to start applying games to their own training, but maybe the structure of their academy they train in just doesn't offer things like that, are there any games that you play where the other person's not aware they're part of your game? Like, are there things that you're just in your own world trying to do, and you know, with a participant that might not be aware of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely harder to do, but definitely possible. I think a way, like for example, like Bernanke's "Fuck Your Jiu-Jitsu." I think he stole this from Ryan Hall, where Ryan Hall, I remember him saying that he saw Ryan Hall just like kind of like dancing on someone, where he was just like almost just like a gargoyle on their turtle, and it, like in a way he thought it was like disrespecting their jiu-jitsu. So approaching someone's jiu-jitsu in the sense where you're gonna let them get everything they want, but not let them do it successfully. So you can approach this from different perspectives, but from top, for example, a good example of fuck your jiu-jitsu would be like, I just engage as deeply in your guard as I possibly can, and just not let you get any offense going. However, there are issues to this, because obviously if you're not communicating that's a game, let's say I fuck up and get swept, then I can't really reset. And so there are problems to this. But you can do things like that, and similarly with guard retention, where if you were to want to play a game focusing just on your guard retention, you can play a game where you basically don't attack your partner from guard, and you just work on your guard retention. As opposed to, I find a lot of people, they almost um, disguise their weakness in guard retention with guard offense, where sometimes people have places where they're very comfortable in guard that they don't necessarily, if they're good at getting there and they're good at playing the position, it's not necessarily often in which they're not able to get there. So practicing the stuff outside of that is not necessarily very common. So sometimes people have weaknesses the moment you get them outside of their guard of choice. And I think this is something that one can choose to play. But obviously, because it's not necessarily mutually consensual, that if you fail the round, then you don't necessarily have the ability to reset. But this is one way I do this a fair bit if I'm just like cross training or something like this.
Yeah, that's outstanding, man. I love what you said there too about the tendency people have to mask their weaknesses with kind of their stronger points. And I know I've certainly been guilty of that myself. In fact, when you mentioned guard retention, that was the primary thing that I would focus a lot on my offense to hide the fact that my retention was trash. So, and I eventually doubled down and started focusing on my retention, which I'm glad I did. But speaking of focusing on weaker areas and trying to sharpen things, something that was revolutionary for me in my own progress is when I started keeping a training journal and actually like physically logging things that I was learning and not just relying on my memory to keep track of everything. How do you typically catalog your own knowledge and track your own progress?
Yeah, so that's actually quite funny because I actually started keeping a training journal from listening to you talk about this, and I eventually changed it a little bit where like I actually have a few books of my training because I would basically just write down everything I learned in class. But at this point, I've kind of adapted it. I think I have like 3 or 4 notebooks full of this. But I eventually adapted this, especially because I find it's more important for me. Like, so for example, I'll just like describe what I do, where I kind of write down what are my thoughts and certain conclusions that I've come to from my own training and trying to derive information from training and not necessarily from instruction. Because what I find is sometimes like if I were to derive something directly from instruction, I don't have the first-hand experience that really makes it stick per se. Whereas if I have something from training and I've like experienced it and it feels like there's something there, and that can often come from me watching an instructional, then I write it down. But I'm not going to watch an instructional and just write it down without having experienced it per se, because I find that there's too much disconnect there for me to actually be able to use any of it. Often what I'll do is I'll screen record an instructional, and before I like not the whole instructional obviously, but certain portions that I really want to revisit, and then before I'm training or whilst I'm training, I'll review these and I'll like look through them and I'm like, okay, let me try play around with this and so on and so on. And then if I'm able to derive anything from that, then I'll write it down in my notes. And so this is how I've kind of used it in more recently per se.
That's awesome. Well, man.
Welcome to this instructional / short course. We're going to be talking about outside passing, and this is going to be very similar to like kind of J-point camping, like toreandoing and stuff like this, but I'm going to try kind of share my understanding of this topic and how I think of this, because this is probably one of my favorite ways to pass, especially in conjunction with tripod passing. So we're going to go over like the basic structure of entry, maintenance, and offense, and we're going to try to distinguish these similar to if you're familiar with my tripod DVD, in a very similar manner as to that.